Hello. Today, my guest is Grandmaster Eugene Perlstein. Uh, Used to be my student. And the topic of today's discussion is some more revolutionary development in the openings. Today's openings we have is a Scandinavian. We already had one DVD on Scandinavian, but this is different line. And we're going to have now more opening revelations than we used to have in past, and theory will be changing more rapidly thanks to Ripka engine, which is absolutely, if you give it a little time and on a relatively powerful machine, it's totally flawless. That's why it makes a lot of adjustments in modern theory. So lately in Scandinavian defense, e4, d5, ed, queen takes d5, and knight c3 move. Knight c3 is by far not the only move here. There are moves like d4, knight f3. We're going to analyze them briefly, but right now we want to focus your attention on the knight c3 move. Eugene had a lot of, he has analyzed this position and he saw a lot of games and he brought some material which we further refined. And we come to conclusion that there is no easy way for white to get an advantage. And Ripka agrees with us. Queen d6, d4. This is all very well known. Knight f6, knight f3. Been played many, many times. And c6 move. And in this position, I would like to give the microphone to Eugene, what he has to say about this position.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I was trying to find the refutation for this awkward looking move queen d6. As we all know, moving the queen twice in the opening is not a good thing. And originally, I tried to refute the whole opening, but as it turned out to be, this is a very strong positional idea that queen on d6 is actually a very useful move, because it turns out to be that knight on c3 is not on the best square because it's blocking the c2 pawn. And we're going to look at later other lines where pawn will go to c4 and the knight stays on b1. But in this particular position, what are the ideas for black? Number one idea is to develop his light square bishop to g4. And it's really not so easy for white to stop this plan. So bishop g4, e6, and knight bd7. And why is that such a good thing? Once the knight on f3 is pinned, e6, knight bd7, and we are basically done with the opening stage. There are no weaknesses, and this position could be easily played on the club level or on a grandmaster level.
So the main move in this position recommended by theory is knight e5. You see, white wants to put the bishop on f4. In order to enable this idea, they have to go either g3 or bishop f4. Or knight e5 with the idea of bishop f4. So knight e5 is the main move in this position, and the best answer for black is knight d7. And theoretically best move is knight to c4. Now in this position, black goes queen c7, and white plays queen f3. That's a good idea because white wants to play bishop f4 and also castle queenside, which will give white some advantage in development. So knight b6 and bishop f4, and here queen d7. So this position, I want to give the microphone to Eugene. He will tell us what are the main moves that happened before and what is Rybka's big preference in this position. Rybka kind of refuted Rybka kind of likes move knight takes b6, which was not played before by white. But Rybka proves that after knight b6, a takes b, and white castles long. This position is very good for white. So Eugene, show us please some variations connected with queen g4 here.
Sure.
And it was known as queen g4 is the best move.
Yeah, the main idea behind queen d7 is actually played by a very strong grandmaster, Sergei Tivyakov. And the main idea is to play queen g4. And after queen takes g4, bishop takes g4, f3, black can now simply retreat with the bishop. For example, bishop to
either f5 or e6 maybe,
or e6.
Okay. And go g6 after that.
And yes, followed up by g6, bishop g7, castle short, and black has solved all his opening problems. So now let's go back.
So in this position, however, we know that Rybka evaluates very highly the initiative. And in this case, Rybka proves that white has very solid advantage playing for initiative and not exchanging queens. So queen e3, and based the analysis that we came to conclusion that this position is not very good for black. Based on Rybka, even queen e6 is the best move. Still keep trying for exchanging queens, and here
the key move that completely switches the game around is d5. After d5, it turns out that black is faced with the main problem, what to do. Do you exchange queens and go to bad endgame? After queen takes queen, bishop takes e3, and now it's clear that the endgame is terrible due to the doubled pawns and b6 being under attack.
For example, now bishop pawn on b6 is hanging. I think some move like b5 can be immediately refuted by d takes c, b takes c, and knight takes b5. This may simply win for white. Bishop takes b5, and now I think maybe black has to play knight d7, because if bishop goes to d7, then rook takes to d7 will be absolutely devastating. Knight takes d7, and rook d1, and after rook d8, bishop b6. Black is hopelessly lost. This position is very, very dangerous. So we did mention that it's good for black to exchange queens. However, they cannot be too far behind in development, even if queens are off the board. So in this position, the best move for black is knight takes d5. And here white plays knight takes d5. And that's the position that looked okay before. But it's not now, because after queen to b3, black is nearly lost. Well, on something like bishop d7,
rook takes d5,
and on bishop c6,
the move that ends the game, you can say, with a decisive advantage, is bishop c4 exclam.
And you see, when they say that it's very bad to be very much behind in development, this is perfect example of it. Black is on a verge of total destruction. So this position is not good. So going back to the position where black chose to play queen g4. This is position where black plays queen g4. Based on those analysis, we put quite a bit of time with Ripka, and Eugene did some fantastic work on it. We came to conclusion that queen g4, we cannot show you all the variations that we looked at, that queen g4 is not a good option for black. However, if black plays e6, black has, let's talk about this position in generally evaluating it. Black has very good pawn structure. Double pawn is very good, makes very solid control on queen side and also potential b5 and b4. White's c3 knight doesn't have very good future. But on the other hand, c8 bishop is very, very badly placed. So black wants to do bishop e7, queen c7, bishop d7, and c5, or possibly just leave queen on d7 forever and maybe go bishop e7, b5, b4, and then go b6 and bishop b7 or bishop a6. This position, we believe, that is very playable and it's okay for black. I personally would prefer to play with black. That does not mean that black has an advantage, but I like this position.
And the reason why I like this position for black is because black has a free attack. We have an open A file, an unstoppable threat with b5, b4.
But first, what we have to do, we have to, of course, complete development and castle. Only then we can think about active operations on queen side.
And this is a great position to analyze on your own and to play against the computer.
And so this line we have no problems with. So before we go any further, we already mentioned that this position after b5, it's real bad for black. You play d takes c, b takes c, but we play not knight takes b5. Knight takes b5, I just showed you how dangerous the attack may be, but by far the best move is bishop takes b5, and after cb, knight takes b5, black has absolutely no defense to knight c7 check, and black has to resign here. Knight c7 actually, it looks a lot more like mate than a check. So on after bishop d7, we can just pick up the rook. So the I don't know if knight takes b5 is good, but bishop takes b5 simply wins the game. So this position is absolutely okay for absolutely dangerous for black. So black cannot play queen g4, and it's all determined. So black has to play in this position. Black must go with e6 variation. So that's why queen g4 move that was highly recommended before is not really good. So generally we claim that this position is okay for black. Now, we made already 2 moves with the queen, and in very near future, like in next 5-6 moves, we're going to make more moves with the queen. And every rule in chess says that don't develop the queen in the early stage of the game, and even more, don't make too many moves with the same piece, which is a queen in this case. But why is this okay here? It's important to point that while we're making these moves with the queen, white is not getting ahead in development. Let me explain why. White played knight f3, knight e5, and if they later exchange this knight for one of the black's minor pieces, then we will have white making 3 moves and exchanging it for a black piece that made 1 move. That's against the general principles as well. So what we do, we're making moves, queen moves, and getting favorable pawn structure, which compensates somehow black's which makes up for black's lost tempos. So in this position, so we already covered knight c4 move, and now I want Eugene to explain us about bishop f4 move and f4 move. So he made some observations, he made some analysis, and he made some research, which is very valuable for understanding this variation.
So before we go to the 4 move, I want to talk about this natural looking bishop f4. White is simply threatening to play knight g6 or knight takes f7 in the right moment. That's why you have to meet bishop f4 with immediate knight to d5. And now white has 2 options. Main line, knight takes d5, or just retreat with the bishop to g3. If bishop g3, then you simply take the knight, and after b takes c, white's pawn structure is ruined. And then you simply follow up with knight takes e5, bishop takes, and now any queen move, for example, queen a3, and black is already better. So that's why white has to take knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and here white has to play knight to f3. The reason white has to play knight f3,
because, for example, if bishop goes to c4, black simply has queen e4 check, and white is in trouble.
and if bishop goes to e2, then black can simply take the knight on e5, bishop takes e5, and don't be afraid to take the pawn on g2. And this is the game Anand Tivyakov, where black simply won a pawn and Anand didn't get sufficient compensation. So after knight f3 back, we simply play knight to b6. Again, the main idea of the variation is to develop your light square bishop, followed by e6, for example, bishop to g4 or f5, followed by e6, and you solved all your opening problems.
And I want to point here that what I was talking about too many queen moves, in this position by now, black made 4 moves with the queen. And believe me, you don't feel that you are far behind in development when you go bishop g4 and e6. Black is doing just fine.
And now after knight b6, white plays bishop e2. And here we recommend to play this move bishop to f5, which actually sets up a very powerful trap. For example, if white castles, white is already in trouble after the move queen e4.
That's another queen move. But right now, you know, general principles are okay, but concrete threat is different. And black simply wins a pawn.
And as it happened in a recent game from Olympiad in Dresden, Tivyakov beat another strong grandmaster with black. So instead of castles, white has to play very carefully, c3. And now black has several ways to finish his development. One way is simply to develop the bishop to g7. And black is doing great. Or also you can simply play e6 and bishop e7 followed by castle against any grandmaster. Black is happy to get this position as black.
So now finally we get to the move that was endorsed by Grandmaster Shirov, and quite sharp move and very ambitious move, f4. Recommended way to play for black here. Black
now plays knight to b6. White follows up with g4. This is the aggressive strategy.
If white doesn't play g4, we're going to complete development with bishop f5 and e6, and we have good grip and control of central squares. Practically what white has only the knight on e5. We have no problems here. So g4, and now you have to play g6. This is a very prophylactic buffer against white's attack. And now after g5,
you simply play knight f2 d7, knight e4, queen to c7. Again, don't be afraid that you're moving the queen many times in the opening.
And black did make too many moves. Black is cramped, but white's advanced g5 and f4 pawn, they work both ways. They are very advanced. At this point, they don't create immediate threat, and they may be potential weaknesses.
And now after bishop g2, I recommend a novelty: immediate take control of the light squares with knight takes e5.
Bishop g7 was played in this position before, and white got some advantage. We don't have to see how and what. Our recommended Eugene had a correct suggestion, knight takes e5, which gives black very, very comfortable position.
And now white has two ways to capture on e5. Let's take a look at f takes e5. Bishop f5. Notice that we prepare alongside castle. And now the main move is queen to e2.
If white goes knight g3, after bishop e6, we think black is better here, because with potential castle, white has very difficult time to complete development. And then we can even go f6, open position, or we can go bishop d5 and e6. Black is very comfortable, not to mention c5 move. So in this position, queen e2 is the main continuation.
And now black simply follows up with castle. Bishop e3.
White is preparing long queenside castle.
And now you have several ways to play this position. You can play immediate h6 and get your bishop involved into the game. Or you can play bishop to e6 with the idea to control light squares, potentially bishop d5, knight c4, and after bishop d5 you might even play e6 and have very easy development for your bishop.
Also, we like very much in this position, after knight takes c5 and fe, the other move, bishop e6. The first suggestion was bishop f5. Second suggestion, maybe even better suggestion, bishop to e6. And after queen to e2, castles long, black has, maybe it's temporary, but black has initiative. And after bishop e3, there is knight to c4 move. It's very strong move. We are not so much threatening to take this dark square bishop, but if white castles here, then all of a sudden they get in a lot of trouble after queen a5, attacking the a2 pawn, and white is in a lot of trouble. a3, queen b5. Well, I have to point that king b1, it's even worse, because after queen b5, white simply loses the queen. White simply loses the queen because of the queen takes b2 mate threat, and also knight a3 winning the queen on e2. And even after a3, queen b5, black wins at least a pawn. This gives black very good potentials, and I should say black has more interesting plans and active play than in most of the openings we do after white plays first move e4. So this position is perfectly okay with black. Bishop f5 move, or maybe even better, bishop to e6. So we give you, we don't want to give you completely ready material that you just go and don't think at all. We give you good options. You have to choose on your own. This way, if you pick one of the options yourself, you will know it better, you will feel positioned better, and you will be a lot more comfortable in the game. If knight goes to c5 here, we can simply go bishop d5 or even bishop f5. Now bishop on f5 stands very well. As far as the knight on c5 does not represent any danger. We can go e6 and later simply take with the bishop on c5, or we can remove this knight simply by playing knight d7. And as I already mentioned, bishop d5 is a very legitimate option as well. So we covered main move, which is knight e5. Practically this is most ambitious move. Well, the popular move g3, another popular move is g3, but it's popular not because it creates a lot of problems for black, no, because it's just an easy way to develop white's pieces, which white can do practically in any opening. And also in case, just in case white wants to play bishop f4. Here are several continuations, and we give it to your discretion to play. One move is bishop g4, and after bishop g2, simply e6. And anytime white plays h3, you can either retreat or take on f3 with further development with bishop e7 and castle. Very solid position for black. Or you can simply play bishop h5. And the other option, which I like as well, I analyzed consequences of move bishop f5, and that's not bad. Also the same idea, of course, to develop light square, bishop go e6 and conclude the development. And this, if bishop goes to f4, we can go queen b4, which we couldn't go successfully queen b4 if bishop wasn't on f5, because white can play a3 and after queen takes b2, drop the queen, unless bishop is on f5 and we have queen takes c2. So that's the purpose of bishop f5 move, as well as just to develop a minor piece. So you have bishop f5 and bishop g4, and the idea of going e6, conclude development, and have very solid position and very playable position.
So we looked at knight e5 and g3, and black has a great game in both of these variations. Now let's focus on white plan to castle short with idea bishop d3, bishop e3, followed by queen e2, and then typically white castles long. So after bishop d3, we play bishop g4, bishop e3, and now simply knight b d7. And here white can play immediate queen e2 or h3 followed by queen e2. Either way, we can play bishop to h5, or as Roman mentioned earlier, it's totally fine to take on f3, queen takes, e6. And the key here is you want to castle on the same side as white. So if white castles long, black castles long as well. But let's take a look at more ambitious bishop h5. So for example, queen e2, e6, castles, bishop e7, and here white plays the aggressive move g4. And after bishop g6, white follows up with aggressive plan g5. The key here is that black has a very safe position due to the move knight to d5. Notice that this is a very good square for the knight. White takes on g6, h takes g. The weaknesses on h3 and g5 will actually play important role in the endgame, and it's not so clear why white started this attack. And if white follows up with knight e4, black simply plays queen c7, and after c4, knight takes e3. For example, pawn takes e3. We simply play castles long. And I like this position for black. Black has a very good open file, h file. White has no chance to attack the king, and all the endgames are favoring black. So this concludes bishop d3, bishop e3 line.
So we covered after knight c3 every continuation, and queen d6, every continuation can be played for white and make sense. Now we are not going to analyze continuations like b3 or d3 or g3 because it's going to be like teaching chess. What you do here, and we are not teaching chess, we are teaching some particular opening here. And if you have any questions, just take any opening manual. What will they recommend to play against moves that make no sense at all? So knight c3, queen d6 is completely covered. But main advantage and main reason I would recommend this queen d5 and queen d6 line, because this is another opening for you to learn quickly, and you're going to get very reasonable position, and that's every average chess player's dream, to play something, not to learn too much, and to get good positions. If you can get winning position, it's even better. But there is no such a thing that takes only very little time to learn and you get winning position. So here you learn very limited amount of material and you get a reasonable position. However, we cannot complete knight c3, the variation of queen d6, without knowing what we're going to do if white goes d4 or knight f3. In other words, if white does not play knight c3, before they go c4. What I mean by that, if they want to go d4, c4, and knight c3, what happens in those cases? So knight c3 is one continuation, and there are two big continuations with d4 and knight f3. There's something, is the way white can fight for opening advantage. And that's what we need to know how to play. And moves that make no sense, we are not going to cover on this DVD. Now, I want Eugene to explain on both continuations on d4 and on knight f3 most useful and the simplest ways for black to get a comfortable position.
And here white can play knight f3 followed by d4 or immediate d4, which usually transposes. If white plays knight f3, we play bishop g4. This is a thematic move. You want to immediately pin the knight on f3. Bishop e2, knight c6. Black's plan is to complete his queenside development with castles and put pressure on white's d4 pawn after white plays d4. So after knight c6, white's main line is actually d4, and black castles. And this is actually exactly the same position that we get if white plays first d4. Now you play knight c6, knight f3, and bishop g4. So this is exactly the same type of position, bishop e2, castles. And here the main line is to attack the queen with the move c4. And we recommend queen to f5. Please notice that the rook on d8 is playing an important role, especially having the queen on d1. This X-ray is going to be the theme of this variation. In the right moment, black will have to play e5 and undermine the pawn on d4. So after queen f5, we already threatened to take on f3 and to take on d4. So white has to play bishop to e3. In this position, we recommend to play immediate e5. We think this is the best move and gives black very strong active chances. But before we cover this move, let me show you what happens after the other main move, bishop takes f3. And the positions that happen here are actually quite sharp and require deep theoretical knowledge. That is why we actually prefer e5. After bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, black has this beautiful combination that starts with the move knight takes d4. Bishop takes d4. Another move, by the way, is bishop to g4. And after knight c2 check, queen has to take. Our queen is pinned, so we can't recapture on c2, but we simply take on g4. And this is the type of position which is hard to evaluate but it's clear that after castles, white has sufficient compensation for the pawn. Pawn on a7 is hanging, white is ahead in development, and it's clear that white is going to attack first. That's why this is quite risky to play. So let's go back. And besides bishop g4, we can finish this line with bishop takes d4. Now black has this wonderful move queen e6 check, and white really has to go bishop back to e2. If king to f1, this simply loses to queen takes c4, followed by queen takes bishop, and black is doing quite well, up 2 pawns. So let's go back. And after bishop e2, it seems that white is simply up a piece. But not for long. We have this very strong move, queen to e4. And it turns out that the bishop on d4 cannot be defended. So white has to play castles. And this is another position where we think white has sufficient compensation for the pawn. For example, if queen takes d4, queen a4, e6, and now knight c3, with idea knight b5, rook d1. It's not easy to defend as black. So let's go back to the move e5. So again, in this position, we recommend the move e5 instead of the other main move bishop takes knight followed by knight d4. After e5, it is white who has to solve the opening problems. He is pinned on the d file. He cannot take on e5. He cannot defend the d4 pawn either, which kind of leaves him with only one move, d5. And now black is not afraid. The knight is actually quite safe on c6 for now because of the pin. And black simply plays knight f6 and tries to finish his development. So let's see what happens. White castles. And now we play e4. This is the best way to play this position. And after knight to d4, knight takes, bishop takes. Notice that black is not behind in development at all. As a matter of fact, black just has one more move, bishop d6, to finish his development. And we think this position is easier to play as black. Black has a very easy target on the pawn on a2. Exchange of the light square bishop only favors black. If bishop takes g4, knight takes g4, black has a lot of different mating nets. And if white plays bishop takes f6, we have the intermediate move bishop takes e2, queen takes e2. And now after the simplest queen takes bishop, notice that e4 pawn cannot be captured, because if queen takes e4, then after queen takes b2, white is completely lost. The rook on a1 is hanging, and the knight doesn't have any squares. So what does white do? Well, his best chance is simply to play knight to c3, and after queen e5, threatening mate, g3, for example, rook h to e8, black has a great game. Notice that the bishop is actually a very strong piece. We're going to play f5, f4. If white plays queen e3, we're not afraid of this at all. We counter with b6 followed by bishop c5. And overall, black chances are probably slightly higher for an attack than white. And we prefer white here. So let us look at the main line from the beginning. After knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2, knight c6, d4, castle, white plays c4, and we simply play queen to f5, bishop e3, and remember the key move now is e5, which we believe is a much better alternative than bishop takes f3. And after d5, simply develop a knight f6. White cannot capture the knight due to the pin. And now castles. e4, knight to d4, knight takes, bishop takes, and simple move bishop to d6. So we looked at bishop f6. This doesn't cause any problems for black because of the move bishop takes e2, followed by queen takes f6. So let us look at the main line, knight to c3. So I have analyzed this position for many hours together with Rybka, and the power of Rybka compared to other popular engines such as Fritz is that Rybka has very strong, deep positional understanding. Both are about equally strong in tactics, but positional understanding is far superior of Rybka. So after knight c3, black simply plays bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, and now knight to g4. Notice that immediately we are creating problems. If white plays h3, this may allow knight h2 with potential knight f3 check, and this is problematic for white. If white plays g3, let us look at this continuation and see what are some of the possible plans of attack are for black. So first we start with a very simple move, rook h to e8. defending our pawn on e4. White also has his chances to attack the queen side with the knight to b5. And this gets us into a very instructive position. Both sides are attacking, and let's see who is first. So we play queen h5, threatening mate on h2. And white has immediate h4 or knight takes a7 check first. At first it seems like knight takes a7 wins the tempo because it's with check, but it turns out that knight takes a7 is almost losing by force, and I will show you how. Instead, h4 is the correct way to play for white, and we're gonna look at h4 in a few moments. So let's see, knight takes a7 first, king b8, and now h4. It seems that white has defended against all of the threats. He is ready himself to play perhaps c5 and get an attack going on the king. But in this position, black has a very, very strong move, and Rybka immediately gives big advantage to black. So the move is c5. Very, very strong move. If bishop retreats, then we simply take the knight on a7. So white has to play d takes c en passant. And now this allows this beautiful move, bishop takes g3, exclam. It turns out that this is almost winning for black. For example, let's say white simply takes on b7. Black's king is totally empty, totally naked, I mean, but it's white's king who is in trouble. Now bishop h2 check, king g2, and here we don't even stop to take the bishop on d4 because of the move knight c6. Instead, there is a very simple move, rook to e6, defending against all of the threats, and the position is simply totally lost. There is no defense from the rook coming to g6, and white has no adequate way to protect against this move. So let's go back. If white plays f takes g, then now we simply play rook takes d4. And again, it's not so easy to find the next move for white. The knight is hanging. The king is actually doing quite well on b8. There is no immediate threat. So white has to play knight b5. And black follows up with another powerful move, rook to d3. It turns out that after c7, king c8, there are no threats again, whereas white cannot really defend against rook takes g3, followed by queen takes h4 mate. And this position is already almost lost for white. So we can conclude that in the main line, after we play e5, white has to play extremely careful himself not to get into trouble. So in this position, white has to be careful, as knight takes a7 is not good. Instead, he should play h4 first. And here, knight takes a7 is coming up, so we have to play a6. If black plays too ambitiously, for example, he doesn't play a6, and he tries to go for attack with the move g5, then we have to point out that white can get a very strong attack with the move c5. It turns out that this move c5 is really strong, and after bishop to e5, white can follow up with another move, rook a to d1. Basically, the main idea is of rook to d1 is knight takes a7, king b8, knight c6, and if pawn takes, and there is no defense against the move queen b5, queen b7, mate. So this shows you that allowing white to keep the knight on b5 is dangerous for black. That's why a6 is the best move. So after a6, knight a7, we simply play king b8, and it's not clear what the knight is doing on a7. So it's probably best for white to take on d6. And after rook takes d6, we have another player, another key player in the attack. Notice that the rook can go to g6 and participate in the attack, whereas white is really struggling to find counterplay on the queen side. So what would happen? White has to defend very carefully now. He has to play rook a to e1, for example. And now if rook g6, king to h1. So the idea being is that it's not so easy for black to open up the position, because the knight everywhere, every time the knight moves, white is going to exchange queens. But moves such as rook to e1 and king h1 clearly show that white is on the defensive and black is doing quite well. We can follow up with f5 and f4, and really I prefer and Roman to black here. So this concludes the variations knight f3 or d4 without the knight c3 line, and in both of these lines we transpose to the position where black plays knight to c6, bishop goes to g4 alongside castle, and very important move e5, which gives black sufficient counterplay, and in some instances you are actually getting a winning attack.
So based on an analysis we just went through, I can come to conclusion that white has a very, very hard time getting some advantage in this variation of Scandinavian. And here is the interesting thing about it. Frequently, in many years, students would ask me, what about this and this variation in the opening? Something that involves early development of queen. And I would strongly oppose them and strongly advise them not to ever do that. And I have never done that before. And I think it's violation of basic chess principle. And I still do think so. I thought then and I do now. But why am I advocating now early development of the queen? When I give instructions, I never tell my students that there are exceptions. I never tell them because they start looking for exceptions. So they have to adapt a certain rule properly.
And only then, when they start following this rule, you have to tell them there are few exceptions. However, you cannot look for exceptions too frequently. And I never thought that ED queen takes d5 is part of an exception. And that's what makes it exception, because only after thorough analysis, observing the games and going through various possibilities for white, I can clearly and confidently say that this is okay to play for black, and I kind of overruling my own conviction that it's never good to develop queen in early stage. Queen takes d5 and queen d6 variation I think is any good, just as good as any opening for black, maybe even a little better. So, having said this, I want to give you a couple of examples of play. A couple of games, interesting games. And one game comes, a very interesting game. It comes from big international tournament in Chorus in Holland, played between two very famous grandmasters. With white, what was Anand, who needs no introduction, and with black was Tivyakov, a former Russian GM that immigrated in, I believe now he lives in Holland. Okay, e4, Anand is white, d5, e takes d, queen d5, knight c3, queen d6, d4, knight f6, knight f3, c6. It's just the way the main line goes in this opening. Knight e5, knight d7, and here we said that there are two main moves. Knight c4 is one which we analyzed, and bishop f4 is the other one. Anand chose bishop f4. Knight d5, it's the only correct move in this position. Knight d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5. Isn't it too many moves with the queen? Yes, it is. But if we point here, you have to notice that even though black made already 3 moves with the queen, they are not behind in development, because white made 2 moves with this knight, and white made 2 moves with the other knight that was exchanged. And meanwhile, white has some difficulties developing light square bishop because of g2 pawn. And another minor piece will be exchanged soon. So this is kind of black's defense against it. So, and after queen takes d5, in this position, white played bishop e2. Well, bishop c4 is obviously not a good move, although it threatens the f7 and attacks the queen, because black can simply play queen e4 check. Bishop e2 was played, but what else can we recommend? if white takes on d7, after bishop takes d7, black is doing very fine. Black has absolutely no problems. Still problems with developing the light square bishop. So Anand wants to go bishop e2 with the idea bishop f3. That forces black to take the g2 pawn. Now, why does it force black to take g2 pawn? It does indirectly because white wants to go bishop f3, and then white will have an advantage. So black, if they want, actually Tivakov played this game very ambitiously, and he played knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, and queen takes g2. Now white is not castled yet, and it's going to be a couple of moves before they castle. Although they are ahead in development, they still have their own problem concluding development. But they're still a little ahead. Black has a little more to do to finish development in full than white. So bishop f3 was played. Queen g6 and d5. Now, I have to point that this move has to be made. d5, it may be one-time opportunity for a white to open position. After queen e2 and bishop f5, black will go e6, and this opportunity will go away. So, being a little ahead in development, white goes d5. And here Tivakov finds very strong reply that has to do with exchanging some pieces. Very strong move. That's a tactical shot. And now, if white takes, obviously, queen e4 check, and you can see this is real bad for white. Rook on h1 is hanging, and after king d2, the black can take the bishop, and position is bad for white. So the obvious respond in this position after bishop g4, d takes c, b takes c. Yeah, black is undeveloped, but white has still a lot to do to bring its pieces to attacking position and to conclude development and to safeguard their king. Queen e2 was played. There's very hard to suggest better move, since on rook g1 there will be bishop takes f3. So queen e2 was played, and after queen e2, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and rook to d8. Black cannot play just e6 and develop because c6 pawn is hanging. So rook d8. Now both sides have problem with their kings. After rook d8, which I think is the best move in this position, rook d1 was played. Very good move by black, queen e6. Castle. Well, of course, this bishop is immune because of queen takes c6 check with a mate. And after castling in this position, black played rook takes d1, and very strong move, h5. black tries to bring the rook in the game, as well as creating positional threat, exchanging queens. White has all pieces developed properly, but there is a problem. Problem is their king. And problem is only 3 minor pieces on the board. Black's queen is very active. And what black is about to create threats on its own. So white has to be real careful here. So after h5 move, queen d3 was played. Threatening mate on d8. Queen c8 is the only move, because f6 obviously loses to queen g6 check. And after queen f7, white wins the queen with rook d8 check. Queen c8 was played. And in my opinion, black is very, very safe here. And white has quite difficulties to prove any advantage. h4 is to stop further advancement of the pawn. It's very difficult for white to do more here, because they have all pieces in perfect position. And that's it. There is very difficult to improve. Meanwhile, the rook is coming for defense. But h4, h3 would create more problems. So h4 was played. Rook h6. King h2. Rook g6. There is black's rook. Now black missing in action only bishop on f8. But they have an extra pawn, and bishop on f8 can be developed real quickly by e6. After rook g6, after king h2, there was rook g6, bishop g3 was played, rook g4, a3. There comes from white kind of waiting moves, wait for black to conclude their development, which is not that easy. a6. Those are hard to explain moves, but they are not that bad. c5. a6 was with the idea black wanted to go c5. You cannot go c5 without a6 because of queen b5 check, especially with rook on d1. So now black went c5, and after c3, rook g6, rook e5, pawn e6. There comes the last piece undeveloped. Well, rook takes h5. White is giving up on immediate attack, but they are threatening rook h8. So after rook h6, they exchanged rooks. White played queen f3, and we don't want to see the rest of the game because it's very insignificant for the point we have to make. White has absolutely no advantage. Black played also c4. White has pawns blocked on dark squares, with both sides having dark squares. Black is doing just fine. Game ended in a draw in a few moves, and very successful opening by the black. Playing this opening sometimes gets you in very out of ordinary positions. You cannot judge this position by number of lost tempos by one side. The problem here, you have to evaluate kind of lost tempos for one side versus lost tempos on the other side. Plus, you have to see if black lost more tempos, what did they achieve? Is there any compensation for it? And a lot of times, we make this, we get to very unbalanced positions which can be evaluated only after careful analysis. Here's the game. Actually, very typical game. Was played by two relatively strong players, woman grandmaster Elvira Skripchenko and strong European player Cyril Marcelin. e4, d5, ed, queen takes d5, knight c3, queen d6, d4, knight f6, knight f3, c6, knight e5, knight d7, bishop f4, and knight d5. Now, this game, after knight d7 and after knight d5, Anand played knight takes d5. Skripchenko played bishop to g3. While trying to take an advantage of bishop on g3 versus queen on d6 standoff. Let's see what came out of it. Obviously, black's queen is going to have to move. So after bishop g3, knight takes c5 was played. Bishop takes c5. Knight takes c3. Forces bc. And queen a3. This is third move with black's queen. Is black behind in development? Well, not quite. And here is the reason. White, if you noticed, made 3 moves with a dark square bishop. Pawn on c3 is weak. And white is not quite ready to start any kind of attack. There is no attack here because they're far from concluding development. So, queen f3, maybe queen d2 was safer. Queen f3 was played. That allows another tempo for black. Bishop g4. Queen e3. Queen to b2. And here, black correctly becomes greedy and starts pawn hunting. And this is correct decision. Well, this was something I would tell my students. Never go pawn hunting, especially if it includes a lot of moves with a queen. But as I mentioned, exceptions there are. And this is not really an exception, because while you're grabbing pawns without losing any time, it's good. Rook c1 was played. Queen takes a2. Now this is a good pawn to take. Queen will be ready to come back to e6. And black has an extra pawn. And white is not quite ready to start any active operations. So c4 was played. Idea is to cut the queen off from coming to the center again. f6, and after bishop g3, well, that's the point I wanted to make. You can see now clearly. e5 move. We see now that both sides need some help in king safety area. So after e5, bishop is coming to b4 or a3, and white may get problems on its own. So after e5, f3 was played. Bishop f5. And here, white played bishop takes e5. Now, this is an interesting solution. What would have happened if white took with a pawn? I don't know what would have happened, but one of the moves I would suggest is just castling long. Looks pretty good for black. And bishop a3 is coming, or bishop b4. And look who is ahead in development. So white played in this position, bishop takes e5. Then queen a5, check. You see black wants to take bishop, but not to allow white to take back with a pawn. And after queen a5, check, king f2, f takes e, queen g5, simply g6, and after rook e1, bishop e7. There is no need to see any more. White is simply lost their piece down, and they who sacrificed pawn for advantage in development, they are way behind in development. Just to point you on rook takes e5, there will be simply queen takes e5, and white's queen is hanging. White simply resigned here in a few moves. So the point I want to make after all this, that this is, actually I already made this point, I do it again and again, that this variation of Scandinavian, I think, requires careful examination and very serious approach by both sides. And maybe white should stick to very slow development and a simple development, maintaining like slight edge in development or nothing. Any active approach and any attempt to refute this opening may come to disaster. And whatever continuation white will choose, black has sufficient counterplay. At this point, after e4, d5, ed, queen takes d5, knight c3, queen d6, d4, knight f6, g3 may be most quiet and seemingly correct continuation, but after c6, white will not have big advantage here. Knight f3, you can go bishop g4, knight d7. There were games played with it, and white has never gotten big advantage. But if I was white and I would desperately need to win. And I knew my opponent plays this variation. If I knew it before the game, I would choose different first move. I believe in this system, and I would never recommend something which I don't believe strongly in myself. And I will start playing this wherever I am playing. I will start adapting this variation of Scandinavian. So I will recommend you the same, and I wish you very good luck with it. Thank you.